Here are the worst things Genghis Khan and the Mongols ever did, ranked from bad to absolutely horrifying. Quick disclaimer, this list is not in chronological order, and if I missed something you think should have made the cut, let me know down in the comments. Number 20, the decimation of Merv. In February 1221, as part of his brutal revenge tour, Genghis and his Mongol forces arrived at the gates of Merv, an important city in modern-day Turkmenistan and part of the Khwarezm Empire. The citizens, well aware of the Mongol reputation, surrendered immediately, desperately hoping for mercy. But mercy wasn't on Genghis Khan's itinerary that, instead, Khan made himself comfortable on a literal golden throne to enjoy the show, ordering his men to systematically execute every prisoner dragged before him. Just to keep things efficient, he instructed each soldier to kill at least 300 people. The wealthiest citizens got special attention, tortured horribly until they handed over every gold coin and jewel they owned. Then, for good measure, Genghis burned down the Sultan Sanjar's tomb and set fire to the city itself, reducing Merv to smoldering ruin. Historical sources claimed the massacre left anywhere from 700,000 to a staggering 1.3 million dead, mountains of bones, rivers of blood. This was Khan's version of "don't mess with me." And remember, we just started. Number 19, the annihilation of Nishapur. Next up, let's talk family drama, Mongol style. It's 1221, and Genghis Khan is busy destroying the Khwarezm Empire because, honestly, diplomacy wasn't his strong suit. But then things get personal. While his son-in-law, Tokuchar, is busy sieging the city of Nishapur in modern-day Iran, some random archer inside the city manages to kill him with a lucky shot. Big mistake. When news reached Genghis Khan and his grieving daughter, she made a rather extreme request: wipe Nishapur completely off the map. And because Mongol family values include wholesome activities like mass murder, Genghis was all for it. In April 1221, the Mongols stormed Nishapur, launching fireballs, catapults, and arrows at anything that moved. After breaking into the city, they didn't just fight, they meticulously hunted people down, house by house, cellar by cellar, even dragging survivors from beneath the rubble just to behead them publicly. Khan's army reportedly killed every living creature, men, women, children, even animals, and stacked their skulls into 3 towering mountains. Historians estimate around 1.7 million were slaughtered in Nishapur alone, though exact figures remain debated. Just 400 skilled craftsmen were spared because even in a massacre, good help is hard to find. And that's how Nishapur, once a vibrant city, became an empty, skull-themed art installation, courtesy of the Mongols' twisted sense of justice. Number 18, Ogedei Khan's insanity. By 1237, Genghis Khan was long gone, but his legacy of brutality lived on through his descendants, like his son, Ogedei Khan. Just like his old man, Ogedei loved sending his armies across the globe, expanding the Mongol Empire with brutal efficiency. Now, you might think that surrendering without a fight would spare you from Mongol brutality, but unfortunately for the Oirat people, that wasn't quite enough. In 1237, according to Persian chroniclers, the Oirat people failed to contribute the expected cohort of young women to the Mongol emperor's harem. A furious Ogedei decided to punish the Oirat. He ordered that 4,000 Oirat girls be raped by his soldiers, and the girls' families were forced to watch. 2 of the girls died, and the rest were distributed as sex slaves among the harem, merchant caravans, and the Mongol army. Number 17, the destruction of Baghdad. Now let's meet Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, who clearly inherited his grandfather's love for, well, destruction and death. By 1258, Hulagu had gathered a massive army, around 150,000 Mongols, plus Chinese siege experts, because if you're going to sack a city, you might as well do it properly. Their target, Baghdad, the legendary capital of the mighty Abbasid Empire, famed for its libraries, palaces, and some of the brightest minds of the Islamic Golden Age. Hulagu didn't just randomly pick Baghdad out of a hat. The Abbasid Caliph, Al-Mustasim, had arrogantly ignored repeated Mongol demands for submission, believing Baghdad was untouchable. Bad move. On February 10th, 1258, Hulagu breached Baghdad's defenses. His soldiers quickly turned one of humanity's most sophisticated cities into a horrifying scene straight out of a nightmare. For a full week, Mongols slaughtered the city's inhabitants, men, women, and children, indiscriminately. Estimates range wildly, from 700,000 to as many as 2 million dead. The carnage was so extreme that bodies clogged the Tigris River. But the Mongols didn't stop there. They dumped thousands of priceless manuscripts from Baghdad's famed libraries into the river, causing the waters to turn black with ink before turning red with blood. And the arrogant Caliph Al-Mustasim? Hulagu had him wrapped in a carpet and trampled by horses, as the Mongols believed spilling royal blood directly would bring bad luck. Hulagu even forced the Caliph to watch his own city city destroyed before killing him, a twisted lesson in humility. One account suggests that Khan imprisoned the caliph into the palace, and on dinner he served him jewels from his treasury to eat. Khan did this because instead of raising an army, he saved the wealth, so it was a lesson for him. By the end, Baghdad wasn't just defeated, it was essentially erased from existence, taking centuries of culture and knowledge with it. And that, folks, is why you don't ghost the Mongol. But hold on tight, we still haven't reached number 1 yet. Number 16, the brutal funeral of Genghis Khan. Okay, we've seen how Genghis Khan spent his life, but let's see how he spent his death, because even dying didn't stop this guy from racking up a body count. It's August 1227, and the legendary Khan finally kicks the bucket. But before checking out, Genghis left one final chilling request. He wanted his burial spot to remain forever hidden. Now, when your last wish involves murder and secrecy, you know things are about to get weird. Here's how it went down according to Marco Polo, the famous Venetian explorer. After Khan's death, his loyal servants carried his body into a secret location deep in the wilderness to bury him. But secrecy came at a high cost. Everyone involved had to die. First, the burial team was promptly executed by another group of soldiers. These executioners then marched through the countryside, slaughtering anyone unlucky enough to spot them, eliminating every single potential witness. But wait, it gets darker. After successfully removing every living witness, these soldiers returned to camp, and just to be extra sure no one could spill the beans, they all killed them. They even diverted the whole river to erase any sign of Genghis Khan's burial. This meant no one alive knew Khan's final resting place. You know you've achieved peak brutality when your funeral literally becomes a mass murder spree. To this day, historians still haven't found Genghis Khan's tomb, making his death as terrifying as his life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Genghis Khan remains history's #1 villain you never want to mess with, even after he's dead. Number 15. The horrors at Termez. Next up is the city of Termez in southern Uzbekistan. And this story shows exactly why you should be careful what you say around Mongol. It was the summer of 1220, and Genghis Khan's forces were busy tearing through Central Asia. While his legendary generals Subutai and Jebe were off conquering Persia, Khan was chilling out near Samarkand, letting his army rest before heading south. That autumn, he turned his attention toward Termez. This city wasn't exactly huge, and its citizens quickly realized they were no match for Khan's soldiers. They managed to hold out for 2 brave but totally hopeless days before the Mongols stormed the city wall. As usual, Khan rounded up every single citizen, marched them into an open field, and gave his men precise instructions on how many people each had to kill. The massacre began, but here's where things got interesting. One terrified woman begged for her life, desperately claiming she'd swallowed pearls. Curious, and not exactly patient, the Mongols immediately sliced her open to check. Surprised, she wasn't lying. They found a bunch of pearls right there in her stomach. Now Khan thought he'd stumbled onto something big. He immediately ordered his soldiers to cut open every last corpse in the city, thinking everyone else might have swallowed valuables too. Spoiler alert, they hadn't. But the Mongols weren't exactly known for their restraint, and so the massacre quickly became an even bloodier mess. And that, friend, is how a single desperate lie, or in this unfortunate woman's case, the truth, turned a standard Mongol atrocity into something straight out of a horror movie. But don't go anywhere yet. It somehow still gets worse from here. Number 14. The sacks of severed ears. Ever wonder how Mongols kept track of how many enemies they had killed in battle? Well, you might not have, but you're about to find out anyway. In the early 1200s, Europe was facing something it had never seen before: the unstoppable Mongol army. By 1241, these invaders had crushed their way through Russia and Bulgaria, leaving trails of burning cities and mountains of bodies behind them. European knights were scrambling to resist, and at the battlefields, things got pretty messy. But the Mongols weren't satisfied just defeating their enemy. They wanted hard numbers. So, after a particularly bloody battle near Legnica in modern-day Poland, Mongol commanders ordered their soldiers to slice off the right ear of every fallen European soldier. They figured counting ears was easier than counting corpses. And honestly, who's gonna argue with a Mongol holding a sword? And just how bad was it? They filled 9 entire sacks with severed ears. Yep, 9 sacks. This gruesome inventory wasn't even a one-time thing. The Mongols reportedly did the same ear-cutting trick in Russia and Bulgaria too, collecting thousands of ears as bloody trophies to celebrate their victories. It's safe to say, losing to the Mongols wasn't just humiliating. It literally cost an ear and, you know, your life. Number 13. The Linchpin Massacre. When Genghis, then called Temujin, was just 9, his father Yesuge took him to meet his future bride, Berte. On their way back, they bumped into some friendly Tartars offering a peaceful meal. Sounds nice, right? Nope, turns out it was a revenge plot. The Tartars poisoned Yasuge, killing him for some earlier feud. Young Temujin was devastated, and things got even worse when his own clan refused to recognize him as their new leader. Life on the Mongolian steppe wasn't exactly fair, but Temujin wasn't the forgiving type. By age 20, Temujin had become a ruthless warrior and a master of revenge. In his first act of brutal vengeance, he crushed the Tartar army, but simply beating them wasn't enough. To make sure they couldn't plot any more peaceful meals, Khan ordered his soldiers to measure every male prisoner against a wagon's linchpin, about 3 feet tall. If you were taller, you lost your head. Instant. It was a terrifyingly efficient way to wipe out an entire generation of potential enemies, ensuring that nobody grew up to avenge their fathers like he had. And that's how Genghis Khan made sure nobody else could follow in his footsteps, by literally cutting off their heads before they got the chance. Number 12. Genghis Khan humiliated and enslaved people of other religions. Many people like to point out that Genghis Khan actively talked to and sought advice from holy men of all different religions, including Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and Taoism. Some people like to claim this as evidence of him being more of a humanitarian. However, in this case, people are forgetting that the man was a brutal and merciless tyrant. While he may have been smart enough to learn about his enemy and all of their ways, he never showed any evidence in his life or rule of having the slightest bit of religious tolerance whatsoever. In fact, he had a special contempt for Jewish and Muslim people, who he openly referred to as slaves, and humiliated by not allowing them to follow their own custom. He proclaimed that the Mongolians had conquered them, but they refused to eat Mongolian food. To the Khan, this was a complete affront to him. He had conquered them and allowed them to live within his kingdom, but they would only prepare food and eat it their way. He forbade them to eat any food that was not prepared by Mongolians, disallowing them from their customs. Muslims were not allowed to kill a sheep, and if they were caught, they would be guilty of a serious crime. Jewish people were also forbidden from following their practice of circumcision. As far as the Khan was concerned, if you lived in his kingdom, you followed his rule. It was likely that his study of other religions was mostly about learning how to better rule his enemy, as he had no patience for coexisting with other religions' quirks and differences. Number 11. Promoting the guy who shot his horse. Ever had someone try to kill you, and your reaction was, you know what? You're hired. Yeah, probably not. But Genghis Khan had different ideas about job interviews. Back before he was conquering half the world, Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, faced off against the Taijut tribe, one of his many rivals on the Mongolian steppe. During one fierce battle, an enemy archer fired an arrow that struck Khan's horse, knocking him down mid-combat. Obviously, Genghis wasn't too thrilled about nearly dying, so after defeating the enemy, he rounded up the prisoners and demanded to know who shot his favorite horse. At this point, you'd expect nobody to admit it, right? Wrong. One exceptionally brave, or maybe exceptionally dumb warrior stepped forward and boldly confessed, yeah, that was me. Instead of killing him on the spot, like literally everyone expected, Khan thought about it and decided, hey, I like this guy's style. Admiring his courage, Khan offered the archer, a man named Jebe, a job in his own army. Turns out it was a good call. Jebe became one of Khan's greatest generals, conquering lands and building an empire alongside the very guy he'd tried to kill. Talk about turning enemies into allies. Or maybe Khan just appreciated a guy with good aim. Number 10. The Savage Party at the Battle of Kalka River. Most of you have probably heard of Ukraine's Donetsk region because of recent headlines involving Russia. But way back in 1223, before Vladimir Putin was even a twinkle in history's eye, the Mongols were busy wreaking havoc on a scale that would make today's conflicts seem minor. Leading this particular Mongol campaign were two of Genghis Khan's favorite generals, Jebe, the same guy who got hired after shooting Khan's horse, and Subutai, a man known as one of history's greatest military strategists. By the time these two reached Ukraine, they'd already destroyed half of Central Asia, and now they were facing a tough coalition of Rus principality. The Rus were fierce warriors, originally descended from Viking settlers. Think medieval Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, all rolled into one. At first, things looked surprisingly good for the Rus. They chased the Mongols across the steppes, thinking they had victory in sight. But Jebe and Subutai weren't retreating. They were just setting a trap. The Mongols regrouped at the Kalka River, ready for the real fight. The first to fall were the Kuman, nomadic warriors allied with the Rus, who ran headfirst into a brutal defeat. But here's where things get twisted. After crushing the Rus' army, the Mongols tricked the Rus' princes into surrendering peacefully. They promised the princes safe passage if they laid down their arms. Spoiler alert, they lied. Due to some obscure Mongol rule against spilling noble blood directly, the Mongols got creative. They built a massive wooden platform, invited all their troops up for a lavish victory complete with dancing, drinking, and partying. While beneath this platform, the captured princes and nobles were slowly crushed to death. Yep, That's right. Mongol generals literally danced on their enemies' graves while they were still alive. And that, folks, is how the Mongols threw the most horrifying dinner party in history. One that proved you really don't want to be on the losing side against these guys. Number 9. Killing his brother over a fish. We've seen how ruthless Genghis Khan became later in life, but his taste for violence actually started at home, literally. After his dad was poisoned by a rival tribe, the Tartars, young Temujin, later Genghis Khan, and his family were cast out by their own people, forced to fend for themselves on Mongolia's harsh steppes. Life was tough, and they spent years scavenging for every scrap of food. Then, one day, 14-year-old Temujin caught a fish and proudly brought it home, knowing it might save his family from starvation. But his half-brother Bektar had other ideas. Bektar grabbed the fish, refused to share, and casually ate it all by himself. Now, in most families, this might end with a fight or at worst, a few awkward dinners. But this wasn't most families. This was Genghis Khan's family. Furious at the betrayal, Temujin stalked Bektar, waited until he was alone, and calmly shot an arrow straight into his back, killing him instantly. Yep, his first recorded act of major brutality was murdering his own half-brother over a fish. But Temujin wasn't just angry about dinner, he was sending a message. From that moment on, everyone knew exactly who was in charge. And that's how Genghis Khan started his career, turning a minor family squabble into his first brutal step toward empire. Number 8. Starving a city into cannibalism. We've seen Genghis Khan's creative methods of terror, but this one's a stomach-turner, literally. It's 1214, and Khan has his eyes set on Zhengdu, the powerful capital city of the Jin dynasty, modern-day Beijing. At first, the Jin ruler was smart enough to cut a deal, giving in quickly to spare the city from Mongol wrath. Crisis averted, right? Not quite. Just when things looked peaceful, the Jin emperor decided to secretly pack up and relocate his court to Kaifeng. Big mistake. Khan viewed this move as a breach of their agreement, and if there's one thing you never do, it's break a promise to Genghis Khan. Enraged, Khan returned with his army, completely surrounding Zhengdu, blocking all roads and cutting off food supplies. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the once grand city descended into desperation. Soon, the citizens of Zhengdu were so hungry they resorted to the unthinkable, cannibalism. Eventually, Khan's army smashed through the city gates, finding a population already ravaged by starvation. Zhengdu was brought to its knees again, and this time, Genghis made sure they wouldn't forget their lesson. And that, friends, is how breaking a deal with the Mongols turned into one of history's most gruesome dinner menus. Number 7. The horrifying siege of Urgench. Finally, let's talk about what may have been Genghis Khan's darkest masterpiece, the siege of Urgench. By now, Khan had already carved a bloody path through the Khwarezmian Empire, and Urgench was the last city standing in his way. But this time, things didn't go smoothly. The people of Urgench put up an insanely fierce resistance, holding off the Mongols for a staggering 6 months. When Khan's troops finally breached the city wall, they expected to start looting and pillaging right away. But the enemy wasn't done yet. Urgench's soldiers fought house to house, guerrilla style, making life miserable for Khan's exhausted warriors. Annoyed and losing patience, Genghis decided on a simple solution. Can't find the enemy? Just burn the whole city down. And that's exactly what the Mongols did, torching everything in sight. But even then, the surviving defenders refused to surrender, knowing the Mongols never showed mercy. Now, Genghis Khan didn't like being defied, so he took things one terrifying step further, ordering his men to divert a nearby dam, flooding what remained of Urgench. Anyone still alive, soldier or civilian, was hunted down and executed without exception. Some historical records claim over 1 million people were slaughtered, making it possibly the single deadliest siege in human history. True or not, one thing's clear. Genghis Khan didn't just defeat his enemy, he completely erased them. Number 6. Siege of Otrar. Molten silver execution. Ever had someone disrespect you so badly you wanted to start a war? Genghis Khan did, and spoiler, he actually did it. It's 1219, and the Mongols had their sights set on Otrar, a prosperous city on the Silk Road in modern-day Kazakhstan. Normally, Otrar welcomed traders from all around Asia, but this time, things went very wrong. Khan had sent a caravan loaded with valuable goods, gold, silk, you name it. But the governor of Otrar, a guy named Inalchuk, decided these Mongols were probably spies and killed all 450 merchants. Bad idea, buddy. When Khan politely asked the Sultan of Khwarezm to punish this insult, the Sultan did something even dumber. He executed Khan's diplomat and humiliated 2 others by shaving off their beard. Cutting off a Mongol's beard wasn't just rude. It was the medieval equivalent of tweeting nasty insults about someone's mom. Historians now call this one of the most consequential disses in world history, and Genghis responded exactly how you'd expect, by going full Mongol mode. He unleashed his armies on Otrar, determined to teach everyone involved a lesson in basic manners. The city held out impressively until a traitor named Karaka opened the gates, hoping to gain favor with Khan. Bad move. buddy. The Mongols stormed in and slaughtered every single inhabitant, man, woman, child, no exception. Even Karaka, the traitor himself, was immediately executed because, as Khan famously said, you can never trust a traitor. But the worst fate awaited Ochar's arrogant governor, Inalchuk. After he was finally captured, alive, per Khan's specific orders, Khan decided ordinary execution wasn't painful enough. To send a message about greed, Khan had molten silver poured into Inalchuk's eyes, ears, and mouth. A horrifyingly poetic end for a man accused of greed. And that's how disrespecting Genghis Khan turned into one of the most brutal revenge stories ever recorded. But don't relax yet. There's plenty more Mongol madness coming up. Number 5. The horrifying execution of Fatima Khatun. Think the Mongols only saved their worst behavior for the battlefield? Think again. Welcome to Mongol court life, where palace intrigue made Game of Thrones look like a family picnic. This story starts with Fatima Khatun, a prominent figure in the Mongol court, who found herself on the wrong side of political drama. In the 1240s, when Genghis Khan, the great Khan at the time, fell mysteriously ill, the court immediately started hunting for someone to blame. Naturally, accusations flew everywhere, and Fatima ended up being accused of witchcraft, this apparently for trying to harm the Khan. Instead of holding a fair trial, because fairness wasn't exactly a Mongol specialty, Fatima was brutally tortured for days until she finally confessed. Historians, like Juvayni, described her torment in disturbingly vivid detail. The Mongols didn't stop until Fatima admitted to witchcraft, and then, just to make sure the lesson stuck, they executed her in possibly the most horrifying way imaginable, by sewing shut every opening in her body, wrapping her tightly, and leaving her to suffer and die slowly. As if that wasn't enough, everyone even remotely connected to Fatima faced similar torture or immediate execution. This wasn't just punishment, it was psychological warfare, designed to make anyone who even thought about defying the Khan rethink their life choices. So yeah, crossing the Mongols wasn't exactly great for your health, or anyone else's for that matter. Number 4. The devastation of Kiev. Let's fast forward to 1240. Genghis Khan was long gone, but brutality clearly ran in the family. His grandson, Batu Khan, son of Joki, was leading the Mongol charge into Europe, and he had his eyes on the proud city of Kiev, today the capital of Ukraine. Kiev was big, wealthy, and packed with around 50,000 inhabitants, exactly the kind of place the Mongols loved to burn down. When Batu's armies arrived, they didn't waste much time. After a brutal siege, Kiev fell, and the Mongols systematically slaughtered nearly everyone. Out of 50,000 residents, only about 2,000 survived, and even they probably wished they hadn't. An Italian diplomat named Giovanni da Pian del Carpine traveled through Kiev a few years later, and his diary captured the horror perfectly. He described seeing countless skulls and bones scattered across the field. A once thriving city was reduced to barely 200 surviving homes, and its few survivors lived as terrified slaves under Mongol rule. Batu Khan didn't just defeat Kiev, he erased it, leaving behind nothing but rubble, bones, and terror. Moral of the story? If you saw Mongols on the horizon, running was probably your only smart move. Number 3. The horrific biological siege of Kaffa. Just when you thought the Mongols couldn't get any worse, they went and invented biological warfare by accident. It's 1346, and the city of Kaffa, now Feodosia in Crimea, is a wealthy Genoese trading post. The Genoese and the Mongols from the Golden Horde, led by Khan Jani Beg, weren't exactly best friends. After several years of fighting on and off, the Mongols decided it was time for a new strategy. While the Mongols were busy laying siege, they had an even bigger problem brewing in their own camp, the Black Death, history's deadliest plague. Khan Jani Beg noticed his troops dropping dead and figured, hey, if we can't beat the city with swords, maybe we can beat them with our own corpses. Serious. The Mongols loaded plague-infected bodies into their catapults and hurled them over the city walls into Kaffa, hoping to overwhelm their enemies with death and disease. An Italian eyewitness named Gabriel de Musis vividly wrote about these terrifying gifts, describing how corpses rained down from the sky, bringing an intolerable stench and horror inside the city wall. And it worked, sorta. While historians debate exactly how much this corpse catapulting tactic contributed to Europe's Black Death outbreak, the fact remained, Jani Beg's brutal ingenuity helped launch one of history's worst pandemics, killing millions across Europe. Number 2. Using civilians as human shield. Let's rewind to 1211, back when the Mongols were just starting their world tour and hadn't quite nailed the whole invading fortified cities. They'd spent centuries being nomadic horsemen, experts at warfare on open plain, but now they faced a totally new problem. Huge, fortified Chinese cities defended by massive walls and stubborn soldiers who rudely refused to let them in. Genghis Khan, not exactly known for patience, got annoyed when his men kept getting shot with arrows and hit by booby traps. So, he came up with a solution that was pure evil genius level. He captured innocent civilians and prisoners from surrounding towns and used them as human shields, literally calling them Karash. meaning living board. Yeah, Khan's army marched entire families, men, women, even small kids, toward enemy walls, daring the Jin defenders to shoot at them. Imagine being a Jin soldier, forced to choose between letting the Mongols get closer or shooting arrows at hostages who looked exactly like your mom, wife, or kid. Not exactly a fair fight. But wait, it gets worse. The Mongols didn't just hide behind their captives. They forced these prisoners to carry siege equipment and battering rams right up to the city walls, knowing full well they'd be the first ones hit by arrows, rocks, and boiling oil. Because, apparently, why risk your own soldiers when you can just use innocent bystanders instead? Number 1. Completely erasing the Tangut civilization. Ever heard of the Tangut people? Probably not, because Genghis Khan literally tried to delete them from history. Let's set the scene. The Tanguts had built a successful kingdom called Western Xia in northwestern China. Culturally, they were actually pretty similar to the Mongols, but by the early 1200s, they'd grown independent and, unfortunately for them, confident enough to defy the Mongols. As Genghis Khan was nearing the end of his life, he decided to give the Tanguts one final chance to surrender peacefully. The Tangut king foolishly said no, essentially telling Khan, "Thanks, but we're good." Big mistake. Even though Genghis was old, frail, and basically dying, he wasn't too weak for revenge. In 1226, he launched his final campaign, systematically wiping Tangut cities off the map. And here's the kicker. While literally on his deathbed in 1227, Khan gathered his sons and issued one last chilling order: erase the Tanguts completely. Just after this, the new Tangut king panicked, realizing he'd messed up, and showed up desperately at Khan's tent with gifts, hoping to apologize. The Mongols made him wait outside for 3 whole days before casually executing. Sorry, buddy. Too little, way too late. With that final king gone, the Mongols obliterated the Tangut capital, destroyed their historical record, demolished their unique architecture, and effectively banned their language and culture. Surviving Tanguts were scattered across the Mongol Empire, forced to assimilate until their civilization essentially vanished from history. Historians today call it one of the earliest recorded attempts at genocide. And if Genghis Khan's goal was making sure nobody ever remembered the Tanguts again, he succeeded. Except, ironically, now you're learning about them in a YouTube video. Awkward.